On today's show, the bullet point, our top four topics in the areas of news, technology, politics, and entertainment. Choose the one you want to hear the most by visiting our Mastodon page at mastodon.vtip.me/at what you missed. Choose one out of the four and I'll read it for you live. Then, breaking news in the areas of politics, national and international stories, live on air as it happens. Plus, the most interesting articles I can find from the Washington Post, CNBC, Variety, Business Insider, The Hollywood Reporter, and more. Then, a moment of Krug, a Paul Krugman op-ed that is a must-read. All of that and what you may have missed in the news today. Stay tuned. Welcome to today's show, guys. I am your host, Eric Darnley Small, and coming at you live today from Brooklyn, New York. And today it's gonna be really a somewhat jam-packed moment of Krug. I've got about two Paul Krugman stories from last week that I don't want people to miss out on, and I think is really important. One of the stories, the first story I get into, is going to really sort of dovetail into what I really want to kind of talk about today. But first, I feel like I got to get to some breaking news. It turns out the Supreme Court has announced that it is siding with Donald Trump in that it will allow his name to be on the Colorado ballot for the general. So it says, and this is from the AP, this is literally, I think, breaking as of, this is 10:28, so as of a few minutes ago. But it goes on, this is from the AP's website, it goes on to say the Supreme Court on Monday restored Donald Trump's 2024 presidential primary ballots, rejecting states' attempts to hold the Republican former president accountable for the Capitol riot. The justices ruled a day before Super Tuesday primaries that states cannot invoke a post-Civil War constitutional provision to keep presidential candidates from appearing on ballots. The power resides with Congress, the court wrote in an unsigned opinion. The outcome ends efforts in Colorado, Illinois, Maine, and elsewhere to kick Trump, the front runner for his party's nomination, off the ballot because of his attempts to undo the loss in 2020 election to Democrat Joe Biden, culminating in a January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol. Trump's case was the first at the Supreme Court dealing with a provision of the 14th Amendment that was adopted after the Civil War to prevent former office holders who engaged in insurrection from holding office again. Colorado Supreme Court, in a first of its kind ruling, had decided that the provision, Section 3, could be applied to Trump, who that court found incited the Capitol attack. No court before had applied Section 3 to a presidential candidate. Some election observers have warned that a ruling requiring congressional action to implement Section 3 could leave the door open to a renewed fight over trying to use the provision to disqualify Trump in the event he wins election. In one scenario, a Democratic-controlled Congress could try to reject certifying Trump's election on January 6, 2025 under the clause. The issue could then return to the court, possibly in the midst of a full-blown constitutional crisis. So that is, I think, pretty much big news in terms of the taking off or getting rid of one of the ways that many people were thinking that Donald Trump could be prevented from ending up back in the White House. I think a lot of people were very skeptical of a state ability to do this. What's interesting is it's unsigned, and I don't see on here whether it was a unanimous ruling, whether it was a 5-4 ruling. I have always been of the mindset that the conservative court is somewhat, is not going to try and do something that is going to be, this civil rights era provision was there to protect blacks and minorities who were, it felt, or the drafters felt that there could be an opportunity for a Civil War era either general or whatever officer who had tried to overthrow the government running for president and accomplishing it there. And I think that again, this was something specifically having to do with disenfranchising African Americans in this case. And I had always felt that this conservative court is not interested in being about disenfranchising people of color just for the sake of it. You would have to do something extraordinary in order to get this court's attention, and it looks like this provision is not one of those things. Now, what's interesting is I'm very curious to see what anyone on the news shows who have been crowing about how this is totally legal, particularly Ludig, who is the conservative constitutional judge, former judge, who believed, and I think wrote in an op-ed along with a more liberal judge, or not judge, but I don't think he was a former judge, but a professor who studies constitutional law, had said that this was totally legal. This is totally appropriate. Conservatives have said this was totally appropriate. So I'm gonna turn to MSNBC and see if anyone's on there talking about this. But I'm at a commercial, so that's why I'm sitting here and I'm flapping my gums because I'm trying to get out of this commercial into the show. Hopefully, it will take only a few more seconds for the next episode. This is Ana Cabrera, and I am very much interested to see what any of those guys would say. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it because time goes so quickly doing this. Already 11 minutes in, but I do want to touch on this other big story from last week that I don't know if it got enough attention, but I think it's slowly getting out there about White Rural Rage, a book that has come out just recently and talks about the what's really going on in rural America, which is Trump country. Krugman talks about it, references the book, and I'm going to reference Krugman's article. And then I want to play a piece of video where the writers show up on the breakdown from last week with Setmeyer and Wilson. And they give a very interesting breakdown on what's going on. I'm not going to play the full video. And also with regard to Krugman's article, I'm not going to read the full article. I'm going to read only a portion of it. And just to remind everybody here that is the way that I roll here. Is, in other words, I do not read out the full article. I just do sections, I think the most important sections, and I go from there and put a link in our Mastodon, mastodon.vtip.me/@ what you missed. And in that, I'm able to sort of be able to get and I want you to be able to see the full article, read the full article, because I don't have a whole lot of time here to do that. Still waiting for the commercial. Okay. No, jeez. Still waiting for a commercial to end, and then I want to take us to MSNBC and see what they're talking about with regard to this particular issue, with Donald Trump being off the Colorado ballot. But I probably got in right as the commercial breaks are happening, because I got super long commercials here, every single freaking commercial around. So let me see. I think it's probably coming up right about now. So let me see if I can. Nope, still a commercial. If I had this set up better, I would be able to flip back and forth to the Krugman article, which I would like to do, but I cannot for whatever reason here. This is not giving me an easy way to go here. All right. Jeez. Okay. Let's cut into this and see if anything is... Okay, here we go. Okay, can you hear it? No, you cannot. Why am I not getting audio here? Should be
Very
getting
much
you.
because
Here we
the
go.
court actually landed where Haley was hoping they would. She said at the turn of the year, when all of this initially began to bubble, that she wanted the courts to keep Trump on the ballot, in large part because she thought that voters should be the ones to decide to put him out of the way. Instead, Haley was saying, I don't think Trump should be president. I think I should be president. Not surprising when she's the only one left in this race challenging the former president and her former boss. But this is going to be, of course, percolating now on the campaign trail. We're going to, of course, hear from Trump, who will try to set the tone on this decision. We've already seen reactions of jubilation from the former president as well as his allies. But for Nikki Haley, this continues to be the sprint to Super Tuesday, the sprint to those 800-plus delegates, and what widely is seen as her last stand in this Republican primary. We're going to see her, of course, on the ground here in Texas, one of those all-important Super Tuesday states. We'll be listening very closely to hear if she has any new reaction on this. But I imagine, knowing the Haley campaign, that if they mention this, it will be a passing mention, and they will move on pushing their narrative that the United States and the Republican Party needs a new alternative.
Okay, I'm going to bring this down because this is more about Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley has won, by the way, her first state. I think it's the District of Columbia, which is not a state, but I mean, she won some delegates free and clear from Trump. So I think she is probably, a lot of people are focusing on her now for that reason alone. I am going to see one more time if they mention anything about the actual ruling itself and any details on it. Trump is going to speak at noon. I, of course, will not be here for that. So there's nothing about the ruling. So we're going to have to pass up on that because I really want to get to this other story, which is, in my view, much more important with respect to white rule rage. And this is from Krugman's article from last week, and it is entitled "The Mystery of White Rural Rage, Why Voters Prefer Politicians Who Lie Rather Than Help." And this is again from the New York Times op-ed. And actually, I should have put the actual title. Well, that is the title of it. I should have put the actual date on this. But let me go into this. So it says, and this is not the entire article. If you want to go to the entire article, there will be a link in our Mastodon. But it says, this process and its effects are laid out in devastating, terrifying, and baffling detail in White Rural Rage, The Threat to American Democracy, a new book by Tom Shaler and Paul Waldman. I say devastating because the hardship of rural America is real, terrifying because the political backlash to this hardship poses a clear and present danger to our democracy, and baffling because at some level, I still don't get the politics. Technology is the main driver of rural decline, Shaler and Waldman argue. Indeed, American farmers produce more than 5 times as much as they did 75 years ago. But the agricultural workforce declined by about 2/3 over the same period, thanks to machinery, improved seeds, fertilizers, and pesticides. Coal production has been falling recently, but thanks partly to technologies like mountaintop removal, coal mining as a way of life largely disappeared long ago, with the number of miners falling 80%, even as production roughly doubled. Technology, then, has made America as a whole lot richer, but it has reduced economic opportunities in rural areas. So why don't rural workers go where the jobs are? Some of them have. But some cities have become unaffordable, in part because of restrictive zoning, one thing blue states get wrong, while many workers are also reluctant to leave their families and communities. So shouldn't we aid these communities? We do. Federal programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and more are available to all Americans, but they are disproportionately financed from taxes paid by affluent urban areas. In the crudest sense, rural and small town America is supposed to be filled with hardworking people who adhere to traditional values, not like those degenerate urbanites on welfare. But the economic and social reality doesn't match this self image. Prime working age men outside of metropolitan areas are substantially less likely than their metropolitan counterparts to be employed, not because they're lazy, but because the jobs just aren't there. The gap is much smaller for women, perhaps because the jobs supported by federal aid tend to be female coded, such as those in healthcare. The result, which at some level I still find hard to understand, is that many white voters support politicians who tell them lies they want to hear. It helps explain why MAGA narrative casts relatively safe cities like New York as crime ridden hellscapes, while rural America is the victim not of technology but illegal immigrants, wokeness, and the deep state. At this point, you're probably expecting a solution to this ugly political situation. Shaler and Waldman do offer some suggestions, but the truth is that white rural rage is arguably the single greatest threat facing American democracy, and I have no good ideas about how to fight it. So the I think the main focus here on with regard to white rural rage is that and I think what Krugman doesn't understand here is that this is about race and racism. This is nothing new. This is not something that we've never seen before. In fact, it is tradition. It is about what America does when it doesn't want to deal with the issues of inequality. Um, the reason why racism got such a foothold and there is an effort, a lot of people say, or you hear conservatives say, that there's been this struggle to end it. I would argue there's been a struggle to keep it. People have been trying to figure out how to keep racism and how to keep the exploitation of black folks, of women, of other groups, and still call this a free society. And again, this is something that, the article talks specifically about Trump country and rule countries. But I would also argue, why are intelligent, college educated, Harvard, Yale educated senators and Congress people also jumping on this bandwagon? And I would have to say the solution is pretty simple, and that is that there is power in exploiting another group. There is power in saying that your problems are because of those people over there, instead of doing anything about the structural issues that exist in the country. Krugman goes over it, wealthy coal companies have decided long ago to get rid of coal mining jobs and just put automation into it, technology, machines, mountaintop removals, that sort of thing, because they can save a buck by not hiring a bunch of miners. But those same billionaires are going to fund organizations that are going to tell you, the problem is not you, it's these people who are on welfare in big cities and wokeness and CRT and all of these, the DEI and all of these things, right? They don't want to focus on the real problems. And if people woke up in rural areas as to what the real problems are, you might actually see a sea change in how people vote, and the power will move away from them towards the people. And we're just beginning to see the beginning of this, because once AI gets involved, automation becomes much more of a thing. More and more people are going to be out of work. On the bullet point today, one of the topics is, and I spoke about this in last week's show, one of the issues that is coming up is for Hollywood, whether the crew members, right? We had SAG and we had WGA strike last year, and those were long strikes considering. But now you have crew, which are people who make a lot less than the actors and the writers, and they're going for blood. I mean, they really want to make big changes, and I don't know if we're going to be able to avert a strike, giving the demands that they may make, and if the studios are going to be willing to meet those demands. But let me play this video. This is a clip from The Breakdown with Seth Meyer and Rick Wilson, and they talk to the writers of White Rural Rage, and there are a couple of things. This isn't the full video. Check out their channel. I believe that's the Lincoln Project will get you to their channel to take a look at the full video here. But this is just a clip, probably about 5 minutes. There are some very specific issues that they bring up that I really wanted to play so that people heard. So take a look at this. The breakdown from, I believe it was last week.
Give us a couple examples of some of the things that you heard from these folks.
Well, you know, it's interesting. You go out to a lot of different places, and you find that people are generally very nice and accommodating, and will answer your questions, even when they're expressing some rather chilling beliefs. I mean, we talk to people who, would start a conversation and then sort of bleed into talking about ivermectin and George Soros. We talk to people about library controversies in their states, about how they wanted to get pornographic filth out of their libraries, and that was the source, really, in some places, really kind of tearing communities apart. Places where they said that a lot of people told us this before Trump came along, things weren't too political. And then everything got more and more political, more and more angry. And then something like a library controversy would come up and really divide the community. And, in a lot of these places, there are some liberals there. That's something you see in rural areas all over the country. And I should say there are a lot of non-white rural people. They don't make up a majority, but they are there. We have a whole chapter on non-white rural people because they're a population that gets completely ignored by the media, by all kinds of accounts. And so, you find these situations where something will happen and kind of set off this spark, and then all of this anger will come really bubbling up to the surface. And one of the things we noticed also is that this is a real national problem, is that the media have really been hollowed out in much of rural America.
Yes.
Newspapers have closed. If there's a paper still around, it might be controlled by some big corporation that has just like fired everybody and is just running a couple of wire stories. And so the only information people get is from conservative talk radio and from places like Fox News. I was going to say is, Rush Limbaugh really created the template back in the 1990s. And he taught a whole generation of people how to engage with politics, how to understand politics, how to kind of break down the news media in ways that really help to reinforce conservative ideas. And that's one of the things, one of the real themes of talk radio is why everything that you're being told by the New York Times or by ABC or CBS, it's all lies. And we're going to explain to you how that is. And then there was just generations following him of hundreds of kind of mini Limbaughs that you find in every single corner of the country.
What was it that you found that attracts these people to Donald Trump when it feels like what you guys call a patriotic paradox?
Well, this kind of upends what we have been taught about what rural people need in order to vote for somebody. Democrats especially always get told you have to go there, you have to really understand them, you have to listen, you have to show that you really grasp the details of their lives and what their real concerns are, and you got to go out to a farm and put on a Carhartt jacket and talk about commodity prices with the farmer and maybe get down and milk the cow.
It's a vest.
And Donald Trump,
Patagonia vest.
Okay. And Trump didn't do any of that. And there could actually be no one who is less connected to the lives of rural Americans than Donald Trump.
So I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about part of what you mentioned the constitutional sheriffs. There does seem to be a movement, a sort of de facto or tacit succession idea or secession idea that seems to be taking hold more and more in these rural communities of their laws aren't our laws. We're going to Chinese menu what we pick and choose to follow. And you see like these sovereign citizens emerging in the rural areas, the constitutional sheriffs emerging in the rural areas who say to state legislative bodies, no, we're not going to enforce the law that you've passed. How deeply seated do you feel that is? Because right now I feel like the Republicans have benefited from it, but it could tip over in my mind to something much more anarchic if we're not careful.
We read about this a little bit. As you know, the history of secession, we think of it as states seceding from the Union, from the Republic. But as we write in the book, the modern secessionist movements, and we cite some scholars who've looked at this in detail. We had a secessionist movement in Western Maryland. There's one in Idaho. There's talk of people all moving to New Hampshire and all this other stuff. it's counties seceding from states, not states
Yeah.
seceding from the union. They want to, Western Maryland wants to join West Virginia because they feel like they're underrepresented. And to be fair, in a blue state like Maryland, if you're from Western Maryland, the most conservative part of the state, and probably the Eastern Shores, is that you are underrepresented, but that's part of the federal bargain, just like people in Austin and Houston feel underrepresented in Texas, for example. And so you either understand and accept these, discomforting realities if you're essentially a blue state person in a red state, and you're a red American in a blue state. That's the reality. And so, is it mostly talk? I think so. It's obviously unconstitutional for these counties to secede to another state without the assent of both states. So, but I think what you're pointing to, Rick, is this notion that we are moving into. I think we already are in a soft civil war. And we might move to something that's a little bit more aggressive. And certainly after what we saw on January 6th, we may already be in that stage, unfortunately.
So that's invaluable piece of information in my view. And it's, you have these people like a Dean Phillips who wants to talk about how Biden needs to get out there and talk to these people. You can reach them, all this kind of business. We just need to understand them. This puts truth to that lie, that there is some kind of an issue with these folks, that nobody is listening to them. They don't care about that. What they care about are these issues that Limbaugh and back in the day, and now a bunch of social media people focus on, right? The border. They are not interested in solving the problem of the border. We know that now. You actually have people who are deluded enough to believe that the Republican Party was really about finding solutions to the border. It is not. It is about staying in power. You have news out of last week. Mitch McConnell is going to step down in November. Mitch McConnell will endorse Donald Trump. He has all but said it. He has repeatedly said that he's going to endorse Donald Trump. This is, cult is a word that gets thrown around a lot, but I really believe that you cannot understand this, and people do not want to understand this unless and until you understand what brought this country to a civil war. We, as indicated in this recording and in the book, we're in a soft civil war. What drove Americans, brothers against brother, sister against sister, father against son? What caused this country to fall to civil war? I think we like to think about these things as, the times, and there were these issues that were unique to the time. This what we're seeing right now is putting lie to that. And I think a lot of conservatives are going to have to reckon with the issues of how do they pull the Republican Party? How do they pull their movement out of this? Because this country, people are not getting the story right on what is going on in this country. And I fear that not only is the media not getting it right, but certain Democrats like Dean Phillips, who, by the way, if you don't know who he is, I'm not surprised. Dean Phillips, believe it or not, is running against Joe Biden on the Democratic side because he thinks he's a whisperer, that he can speak to these Republicans, these MAGA people, that he can put the finger on the pulse and reach them and bring them over to the Democratic side. It is absurd. It is ridiculous. And he's getting almost, certainly in pulling in the 1 to 2%. By the way, he's a young guy, so his running and the fact that nobody is voting for him and is voting for Joe Biden puts also lie to this notion that age is the real issue, right? Because the voter right now on the Democratic side has a young person, a young Democrat who could run, and nobody's voting for him. So that puts a lie to this issue that the issue that's going on here is the age of Biden, and if they could get a younger candidate in there, they would go for them. Same thing on the right. Nikki Haley is much younger than Donald Trump, but nobody's voting for her. So that is the important story of White Rural Rage. Go out and get the book if you haven't. And, I think that people need to wake up to what is really going on in America today vis-a-vis race.